Welcome to Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez. Hey there, how you doing? How you been? Did you miss me? It's been a week and we are back from our break with another episode of Don't Fuck This Up. That's right, it's time for episode 13, and this week's guest is a social media coach, educator, speaker, and content creator known the world over as Jera. I am so excited to welcome you to the show. So Jera, welcome to Don't Fuck This Up.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things that's really exciting about social and the space that you work in is that you, in fact, don't want to fuck this up. I think that's a big focus.
True. However, I'm a huge proponent of failing forward, messy action, really kind of doing things before you're ready and before it feels perfect. So, hey, if we do fuck things up, I think it's going to be great.
I think so too. I mean, I saw a recent post you had on Instagram shared you just wrapped up the busiest month of your career. Before we get into all that, I mean, how are you doing for real?
Wow, it's been a year, if I'm being truly honest, both personally and professionally. It's been pretty rough. I've been very transparent about most of it. And my dad passed away in May. I had to put down one of my dogs the following day. Suffered from a miscarriage very earlier in the year. So it just feels like I keep getting hit one thing after the next in the personal life area. So it has been really, really challenging. And then business-wise, it's been challenging and interesting in that I set an intention at the beginning of this year to kind of pull back a little bit in the effort to find a way to make my business feel more sustainable so that I could find Jera more as a human again, aka Jera outside of the business.
Yes.
And that has meant pulling back in some areas, which has been positive, but also a little unsettling as well. And, it's interesting because the year is not too far off from being complete, and I still don't have all the answers yet. It's been a process. So that just gives you a little taste of just very transparently where I'm at, which has been a lot of ups and downs this year.
I mean, I think this is the place to be transparent, right? I mean, I think that it's never all good. It's never all bad. But I think being honest about where we're at also helps people, navigate forward. And I think you said, fail forward is the approach. And I think we can even apply that, with the less than positive events. I mean, with the challenge, I'm sure comes the evolution. And, I always think that people see you as a very positive, influence in not just social media, but you're very much Jera. And if you're full you, then I think showing up as full you transparently with what's going on is the only way to be. And I think that authenticity is what really sets you apart from other creators.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's so lovely to hear that reflected back onto me, because I think when you are in it sometimes it can be quite challenging to see that in yourself. But I do, if I'm being honest with myself, I do agree. I feel that since 2015, which is when I started this account. Now, granted, it was a very different account. I was in the fitness world and my handle was Workout Bean, which is very different than my life.
I do remember
now.
that.
But I truly feel and believe that I've built my platform on authenticity and transparency and really bringing people along for the ride, which has meant pulling back the curtain on the human side of things.
Yeah. And I think when you're always undeniably yourself, there's the goofiness too. I saw you performed your legendary, if I say, armpit farting technique during a live interview, Jera.
It's happened a couple times
really?
now.
Now it's a thing.
And the first time it ever happened, I will never forget this. One of my favorite, I guess, well, I say professional moments, but it
Yeah.
happened in a professional setting. And it was my first keynote on a stage in front of hundreds of people. And it was all about how to show up authentically, essentially what we're talking about now, and TikTok. So kind of a mix of showing up authentically on TikTok. And I gave an example or a couple examples of my own. And of course, I shared my hidden talent, which isn't really too hidden, of armpit farting. And then, the whole presentation goes, the keynote goes onwards. And at the end, during the Q&A, I got some great questions about TikTok and video. And this one person goes, okay, well, can we see the armpit farts? And I couldn't believe it. Everyone started cracking up, and there, live on stage in front of about 300 people, I armpit farted. And it was amazing. Everyone was cracking up, and yeah, it was a good
I
time.
mean, I
It
love
was a good
that. I
time.
mean, what advice could you give to somebody who's nervous about showcasing their authentic self? Because I think we hear a lot about like showcased authenticity versus like actually being yourself. And I think you're really describing that that's something that you incorporate into everything you do. It is who you are. What advice could you give to somebody who's newer to that?
I think the challenge these days is that when people give advice or when people hear advice about showing up authentically in the digital world, that's where the advice stops. We hear, show up authentically, be your true self, be genuine. And it's a wonderful sentiment. I don't have any issue with that. But it's the fact that the advice there ends.
Mm.
And so if we think about ourselves in the real world, not even with social media, it's already a challenge to just be ourselves. We have self-doubt and imposter syndrome and overthinking, or I mean, at least that's me. Those are like all things that I have going
Here,
on
here,
at
definitely.
different times. And then if we think about, well, wait a second, it's challenging to show up just yourself in the everyday world. But now we're asking people to show up authentically in a digital space, which it feels even more foreign sometimes. And so there are no real tools or tangible action steps to show up authentically. So I've been working on this for years, and I have a framework that I call the 4 quadrants of secret sauce in order to make showing up authentically feel more actionable and feel more tangible. So the secret sauce is essentially you. You are the secret sauce. And it's really beautifully simple in the fact that it is just you, but at the same time, it's wonderfully complex because it is also you. And if we think about us as beings, we have the past
Mm.
that makes us up. We have the current moment. We have these big groundbreaking events and pivots and challenges. However, we also are us. You are you in the everyday, in the in between, in the random, and even in the mundane. I think actually the mundane is one of the most beautiful parts.
Mm.
So if we think about all of those elements and then we try to quantify them or label them for social media, that's where we get to our 4 quadrants. So those 4 quadrants are foundational secret sauce. And foundational secret sauce is where you're focusing more on the past and more so on those big moments, those big defining pillars that have brought you to where you are today, both the good and the bad, the challenges, the achievements, etc. Then we have the personal secret sauce, which is more so focused on the present moment. Think of who you are right now, your personality, your energy, what you like to do on the weekends, who you are outside of the business. So personal is less so business, and it's you as a human in the present moment.
Mm.
Once again, the good and the bad. It could be I'm at the farmer's market and I love to stop at all these cute little stalls. It could also be holy crap, I have a ton of anxiety right now and I'm really struggling. So once again, we have that range within each secret sauce. Number 3, we have professional secret sauce. So this is where the business aspect of you comes in. What sets you apart as a business owner, an entrepreneur, a freelancer, whatever the role is that you may have? How do you approach what you do differently from someone else? What do you specialize in? How do you see things? What's your philosophy with how you live and operate in that professional role? Then lastly, we got the lighthearted secret sauce, which is where the armpit farting would fit in. And the lighthearted secret sauce is as it sounds. It's the funny, the goofy, the silly. I would also say that's kind of where some of the mundane can fit in as well. Sometimes maybe mundane isn't personal. There can be crossover, but it's kind of the little stuff, as well as the funny and the silly stuff as well. So if we look at those four quadrants of the foundational, the personal, the professional, and the lighthearted, we really cover all of these aspects of you. And not only do these quadrants now make showing up authentically more tangible, but it also gives you choice. I think so often people feel that in order to show up authentically, they need to share every moment, every detail, every fabric and fold of their life, which can be really intimidating.
Mm.
And you absolutely do not have to do that. You can show up in all four quadrants, but you might say, for my business, for my comfort level, whatever it may be, perhaps foundational and professional is what makes the most sense for my job and comfort level right now. And if you choose to show up in those four quadrants, you are still showing up absolutely authentically. So that is my overarching advice for someone who isn't quite sure where to start.
I mean, that's incredible. I feel like I just went to a TED Talk in like the best possible way. I mean, I'm like,
I love
I
that.
gotta go categorize these things. I could probably be better, person for my therapist to hear talk if I put things into four quadrants. Really, just
Yeah. Oh my
yeah.
God. Tools for life
Tools
here,
for
not
life,
just social
not
media.
just social. Exactly. I mean, and I feel like what's so interesting is what you just shared. I mean, it was very inspiring to hear, even you break it down that way, because I think, it doesn't overly simplify, the approach to the complexity of self and social media and what people choose to portray. But it also shows, I mean, you have a lot of facets to you, Jera. And I think like knowing, I mean, I do know you were a graphic designer early in your career. You also have a past life in the fitness world. I mean, how did you, kind of take those, arenas that you've worked in? And anytime we're pivoting, we're always bringing something forward. Are there things that you reference from kind of your past lives, if you will, that you bring forward
Oh,
today? Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I love that question so much because I actually think about this all the
Oh,
time
good.
because, yeah, it probably comes up into my head at least once a week because as you mentioned, I have had these past lives, past chapters, and they do all seem at least fairly different because graphic design is very different than being a fitness influencer and soul cycle instructor, and being a soul cycle instructor is very different from being a social media coach, educator, and speaker, which is who I am now. But I see so many
Mm.
parallels and lessons between each. So a few just straight off the bat from my graphic design days, I think my aesthetic eye has done a lot in terms of what I do now. Now, I am not someone who asks people to create perfect Instagram feeds. I don't need your videos to be perfect. I love the casual, sort of even unpolished nature of things sometimes. However, here's a really specific example. I always think about the hierarchy of text on a reel.
Oh,
So oftentimes I'll be scrolling and I see someone with a lot of text on a reel, which could be okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you have a lot of text and it's all the same size and we don't have any line breaks, there's nowhere for your eye to go. And
mm.
it can be really jarring and someone's likely going to swipe away to the next reel. However, if you have a heading, something that's the biggest part, and you have a subheading and then maybe a block of text. Now, there's many different ways to do this. This is just one. That's one way to create a hierarchy of your text. So you're telling someone's eye where to travel on that page. Maybe even we're changing up the font, but not a bunch of fonts. At most, there's maybe two fonts and maybe two colors at most. So that's very, very specific, but that's a graphic design element that I feel has been brought into my social media life. Even like working with Canva, I'm on Canva every single day. I used to be in Photoshop every single day.
Mm.
Canva, I thought I never would transfer over to it because it's sort of like, design light versus Photoshop is like heavy, heavy design.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly that face. But so many of the tools that I use in Photoshop are in Canva, which made it a really easy and seamless switch for me. And it's so much more user friendly. So that's one thing from graphic design. Now, I think the one that I think about more and place even kind of more emphasis on, or perhaps more appreciation even, is what I learned in my soul cycle days.
Mm.
Now, couple things. I have this mantra from my soul cycle days, which is feel the fear and do it anyway. And that was one of my mantras because I came into Soul Cycle with no fitness instruction background, terrible fear of public speaking. I wasn't even that strong of a writer. So here I am pursuing this job, this career that required so much confidence, and I had absolutely none. So that feel the fear in any way and do it anyway mantra is something I learned from Soul Cycle. And it was a huge element in me developing my public speaking skills. I had to walk into a room every single day, sometimes with like 70 people in it, and speak to them and guide them and be their leader and not necessarily have a script that I was following. And for months, I would walk in and my hands would shake. And I was like, thank goodness this room is dark and no one can see how red I am and how my hands are shaking. And thank goodness the music's kind of loud to hide the nervousness in my voice. And so that was really pivotal, I think, in me developing the confidence to pursue what I do now with public speaking. So those are the main elements that I think of with those past jobs and pivots.
Yeah, I mean, it's also so great to hear. I mean, it is kind of wild that you pursued such a an out front, role in terms of Soul Cycle you just described, having all those fears. Did you kind of set that as a challenge for yourself? Was that a goal, or did that just inevitably happen because you were like, "Oh, this looked cool, but now, oh shit, I have to get over this part of myself that is really holding back."
Oh, I think in a way, I don't know if I want to say yes, I set it as a goal, but also I didn't because it evolved organically. So let me explain that. When I fell into the world of fitness in 2015, it was really kind of on a whim.
Mm.
I was feeling crappy. I was struggling with social anxiety. I was at a job that made my hair fall out. I had no friends. And I found this fitness program and made an Instagram account to hold myself accountable. That was April 4th, 2015. And I remember that date so specifically because that's really the first day of the rest of my life and taking a huge pivot away from graphic design.
Wow.
Now, coupled with this fitness moment with doing this fitness program, because I was feeling so good right away within a few weeks because I had community on Instagram. I felt good working out. I felt proud of myself for staying consistent with something. And that's when I rediscovered Soul Cycle because I had taken spin classes in college, just like at the college gym. And I remember taking my first spin class and my mind was freaking blown. And there's no lights. It's bright as day. There's no transitions in the music. When I think of what a spin class was in this rinky-dink
Totally.
college room compared to Soul Cycle,
Yes.
but it blew my mind. And all throughout college, I was like, oh my God, I want to be a spin instructor. But I never followed through, never thought it was possible. So fast forward to 2015, rediscovering Soul Cycle, because I had taken a few classes just here and there over
Sure.
the years. So I was somewhat familiar with it because then fitness was this huge part of my life in a way that it wasn't before in those college days. I thought, oh, wow, this is something that maybe I can do. So it was sort of tapping into this desire and passion that I'd had years ago. And it seemed more feasible in the moment, but I still had a huge hill to climb. But for me, it was the be all end all at the time. Like there was nothing better, cooler, more fulfilling than being a Soul Cycle instructor. And that's why I pursued it at that time.
I mean, that's amazing. And really everything you described is, I mean, you're no stranger to pivots. I mean, what's been that source of confidence for you when you're navigating these larger transitions or even more specifically, who supports you during these bigger changes?
Ooh, I would say early years, definitely my mom, and still my mom. My mom's like my biggest
Oh,
cheerleader.
I
She's
love
just the
that.
sweetest. And even I remember being in college, undeclared my first semester, and was I going to be a writing major or international relations or French or film? And then I call her, I'm like, Mom, I'm going to be a fine art major, and she's like, awesome. I love it. So she's just always been so supportive. So I think she's been so wonderful. And I will say, not just her support, but in my early Soul Cycle days, I actually had to, had to move in with her for a bit.
Mm,
So when I was in training, when they like don't really pay you any money, and I wasn't making money via anything else yet, and
yeah.
so I lived with her for like 6 months on her couch in New York City, which was actually great. It was a blast. So my mom has been wildly supportive, and of course now I'm married and I have my husband,
Yes.
and he really saw me through the first pivot rather that he saw me through was from that lifestyle creator, because I left SoulCycle in 2018,
Mm.
pursued more so being a lifestyle influencer for about a year and a half until I started to pivot into the world of social media coaching. And so that was the first pivot that he really witnessed and was incredibly supportive and encouraging during that time.
That's amazing. And I do appreciate his cameos in a lot of your videos. He is
Yes,
often
he's the
there. Yes,
best.
totally. I
Yeah.
mean, the pandemic was a huge time for social media. It feels like there was a lot of content creators that like literally blew up overnight during this time. I mean, you were pretty busy yourself during the pandemic. You got married in Central Park. You moved from New York to
Yes.
Austin. I mean, a lot going on there. I'm sure it impacted your work too. How did things kind of change and evolve during that transition? I mean, even going from being in New York as like a such an urban landscape and then going to Austin, which is still a city but very, very different. I mean, can you share a little bit about how your actual content you were creating and output there changed?
That time, and I look back on it now and I sigh. Oh, I sigh so big because it's hard to even put words to it, because I look back on it now and I'm almost like, how did I do
I mean, that's my
that? It
first
was
question. Yes. How did you do
Yeah,
that?
it was so much, and to elaborate on that, it was so much because it was at the very end of 2019 that I was working with the business coach, pivoted into social media coaching. I launched my first group coaching program in February 1st, 2020,
Wow.
which was, I mean, I look back like the courage that that took, and I say that because for an influencer to launch into a high ticket group coaching program without much experience doing that, I'm like, oh my God, like, would I do that now? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect, and I kind of like, wow, that took definitely some courage, and it was so much work. I'm a perfectionist, and I truly, truly am so invested in delivering an excellent experience and really providing transformation to my students. So I really care. And because of that, I over deliver, and I'm a total perfectionist. And the work behind that was incredibly intense. So I was launching that group program. I got married March 20th, 2020, when COVID was on the rise and everything was canceled. My photographer canceled 24 hours
Oh my
before.
gosh.
None of our family could come. None of our friends could come. Now, granted, this was a very small wedding to begin with. Like, it was really just a small event. So it wasn't like this huge catastrophe, but it became even smaller. And then a week later, we moved to Austin. So here I am launching and running this brand new business with 22 students in my program, just got married, packing up our apartment and moving to Austin in the middle of COVID.
Right.
So it was wild. And to go back to your original question of how did my content shift, for me, it was this pivotal moment of shifting from being a full-time lifestyle influencer to, wait, if I'm going to be this social media coach, how am I shifting my content and bringing, hopefully, fingers crossed, bringing my audience along? And so the bridge that I found was initially kind of towards the end of 2019 was, okay, I'm an influencer and I know a lot about social media. How can I start sharing things that make sense within what I already share? So initially, that was posing tips and
Mm.
how to feel more confident in front of the camera, and how to make your stories more aesthetic when we were still kind of decorating our stories, and sharing behind the scenes of my content shoots, all those kinds of things. And so that was the bridge that kind of took me more into the actual strategy and the actual coaching world through my content.
I mean, I think that's really incredible. And, you know, as a a coach myself, with executives, it's really, building the trust from your own past experiences is often the best way to get people on board. And, I remember when I was first starting out with coaching a little over a decade ago, it was really challenging to get people to take me seriously until I realized that actually wasn't true. It was really me taking myself seriously. Nobody else was questioning my credentials, but I had to get there in my own mind of like, I'm totally qualified to do this. Now, did anybody go to school to become a social media coach, Jera? No, they don't. Same thing with executive
Right.
coaching. You can do programs, you can absolutely do classes. People should be taking your classes. It sounds like they could really learn a lot from that, but there's no degree in this. And so I think that my own self-conscious, kind of mindset was something I had to shift away from being like, I'm new to this, to being like, I'm really fucking good at this. And I'm really bringing the quality here. So regardless of what I've done before and kind of what we talked about prior, it's about pulling that experience forward into what you're doing today. And so I think that's a through line that you just spoke to and maybe didn't even pick up on it.
Yeah, I mean, you have an excellent point there, and there is so much that we can learn from our experience. And you're right, there's no degree in some of the things that we do, and so we have to give ourselves a little bit more credit from our own experience of what we've been through ourselves and what we've produced with and for other people that makes sense to bring into the current position that gives us the authority and experience that we can then continue to build on.
Yeah. And I mean, did you have mentors in this space when you were coming in? You mentioned a business coach. I mean, who were, or, what was some of like your biggest kind of mentorship moments, or was there some invaluable advice or even lessons that you learned from them early on? Or was this trial and error, self-discovery? Like what was kind of the balance there?
I think it was, for the most part, a lot of trial and error. But I will say that my business coach in those early days was fundamental in supporting me in the business aspect and
Mm,
helping me build my course and helping me get to a place where I could experience that trial and error. I would say one of the things that pop into my mind currently in terms of support are my colleagues and friends in a similar space that I'm in that I can lean on for support. So, for example, during early Clubhouse days, I had to just remember, like, what was that called? Clubhouse?
oh yeah,
Yeah,
throwback.
remember that? That was
Vaguely,
like, that was so
yes.
fun
Yeah,
for a
it
moment.
was.
There were three other gals that I connected with, some of whom I'm already followed on social media, and we started a group chat, and we've been chatting every single day now for 3 years now, something like that. We've all met in person at this point. Not all four of us together at one point, but just like sporadically because we're always all traveling. And I feel like I've learned almost more from them and what
Mm,
we've been able to share in our success, but also in our day-to-day challenges, whether it's little things with clients or pricing ourselves or contracts. So finding that support via peers has been incredibly powerful. And I think the fact that so many people are so open with information, and really we all just kind of want to see each other win, and we're
yeah.
also open with sharing, that has been one of the biggest factors for me, I think.
Yeah, I think peership, and I've referred to it as friend-torship before. I have like friend tours, people who are my friend, but if it's a moment where I'm like, what is actually going on here? Or am I wild that I'm thinking that this is something I'm going to do? And they're like, no, and you're going to do it and you're going to do great at it. And we're going to talk about it again. And I'm like, all right. It's like you
Yeah.
need those people to hype you up and to hold you accountable. And especially when you're moving into spaces that are totally new, that haven't been chartered. I mean, this is, again, like you didn't go to school for social media strategy because it's not a thing that people were going to school for. Being a coach is like relatively new territory. And so finding people who want you to win, want you to be successful, and alleviating that competition, I think is oftentimes, that competition with yourself. I don't know that we can talk ourselves out of having it, but competition with other people, like, if you want to say like being a girl's girl, I think is a good thing. But all of a sudden that's cool again. Thank goodness, because it's
I
so
know.
hard to like try to mean girl your way through an industry that maybe doesn't want you to be successful from the get go. And then you're sitting there and someone else isn't rooting for you. Like, who has time for that?
No one.
No.
No one has time for that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely
Yeah.
not.
I mean, and I think like with the coaching space being a relatively new field, I mean, what has been like maybe your biggest learning with taking on one-on-one clients for, moving into that space?
I think with one-on-one clients, but I mean, to be honest, with all clients, this isn't necessarily, but it does come out more when you have that one-on-one experience with someone, is that I think so many people feel as though their problems, their challenges, their frustrations with social media are around content, and I don't have the right tools, and what scheduler app should this be, and
Mm,
all these kind of I'm not going to say just random things. They're all part of the strategy, but I see the common thread always, without fail, boils down to mindset. Kind of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation with
yeah.
authenticity, and even struggling with self doubt and imposter syndrome. And what I see with social media is, well, someone else is doing it already. So
Mm,
what's the point? Or someone else already said it. What's the point if I say it? And so you're constantly kind of convincing yourself not to show up for, probably there's like a good 3 or 4 common reasons that I see across the board. But that I definitely see that with one-on-one clients, but even in my group coaching programs, that is a very, very common theme.
yeah. And I think, I mean, that really describes something that I think people often talk themselves out of things. I mean, I even had that like when I was initially writing, the proposal for my podcast. It was like, well, there's a million
Of
podcasts. Why should I
course.
do this? And I'm like, wait a minute, because I'm going to do it. And it's going to be great because I care and there's no other me. There's a million podcasts, but there's just one Lauren, and that's great. And there's a lot of people named Lauren. Don't get me wrong, but there's only one me. And I think I had to like check in with myself on that too, and
Yeah.
really realize that like there's always going to be somebody doing something, but it's like just like when you get dressed in the morning, there's a lot of those jeans that you love. They were made thousands and thousands of times over. When you put them on, that's your jeans, right? Like, and so it's the same thing with your
Yes.
content, probably.
Absolutely. And the analogy I always come back to, of course, it makes sense for my fitness days, is imagine you go, we can just get specific and say a spin class. It could be any class, but we'll go with spin class. And you go to Sarah's class, and then you go to Diane's class, and they have the same exact playlist. It's the same exact songs back to back. They even do the same choreography. They even light the room in the same way,
Mm,
and they maybe even say similar ish motivational things. But I can guarantee you, with all of those things being mostly the same, you're going to feel more connected, or you're going to prefer maybe Sarah over Diane
mm,
for her energy, her presence, the way she makes you feel. And sometimes it's not tangible, but it is that feeling. And so I always try to remember that, but I always try and share that with clients and
mm,
students as well, that yeah, there could be lots of other people in the same field as you, doing the same things as you, even sharing about similar topics to the topics you're sharing, but someone is still going to feel the pull towards you, because no one's going to have that unique blend of energy and personality, and, for lack of better words, vibes
yes.
that you are putting out there.
And is that secret sauce you mentioned earlier, right?
That's the
Yeah.
secret
I
sauce.
love
That's the
it.
secret sauce.
I
Yeah.
mean, and I think that like now I have to ask you, who's your ideal client? Doesn't have to be like a specific person, but like when someone comes to you and they're like, here's my situation, you're like, oh my God, this is my jam.
Oh, it's hard to really nail it down to one person. I definitely say, from a general starting point, someone who is the face of their brand.
Yeah.
And so I can look at service based businesses, I can look at content creators, even founders, like people who have a business, but then they have their own social media account to really put their unique voice out there, connected to their brand, but still unique and slightly separate.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would say starting with someone who's a complete beginner, never has made a video before.
Mm,
That's I'm glad to take on the challenge, but it is a challenge. You're really starting from square one there. So someone who has some cadence with posting, and just kind of needs that push, the motivation, and maybe even a re-spark of confidence and a little bit more of a realignment with wherever they currently are. I guess if I had to choose, that would be someone in my ideal client range.
I mean, the good thing is you don't have to choose, right? So it's just like just putting
Yeah,
your wish list out there, we got to manifest something. So
totally.
I mean,
Totally.
yeah, and like I think that's something I'm so curious about too is like, there's so much, when something's on the internet, there's kind of no backsies. And so I think that or is there? And I guess that's a question, is there a backsies? And can you speak from any of your own experiences of, posting something that you regretted or anything like that? How do you handle this kind of it's self PR? I mean, essentially.
I can't think of anything necessarily that I regret, but the first thing that comes to mind is this idea or a sensation of a vulnerability hangover
Mm,
when you share something very personal and then there's this feeling of, ooh, should I have not shared that? Or I feel kind of exposed and open. This comes back to a concept I like to teach called the vulnerability dial.
mm.
Vulnerability is never an on or off switch. It's never, oh, you are vulnerable, or, oh, wait, nope, you're not vulnerable. It's never black and white like that.
Yeah, imagine if it was that linear. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would make our life a lot
A lot
easier.
easier.
But there's nuance to everything, and you can turn the vulnerability dial up a little bit, or you can turn it up a lot. And we can actually even apply this dial image to secret sauce, which we were talking about with the 4 quadrants. So
Yeah.
maybe you do show up in a foundational secret sauce way and you're turning that up to a 10 because you are cool with sharing the big things that have led you to where you are today. And maybe you go, okay, I'm going to share a little bit personal. I'm going to turn that dial up to a 2 or 3, but I'm not sharing my kids. I'm not sharing, my family vacations. And so for that reason, it's not turned up to a 10.
Mm.
So to kind of go back to what I was saying originally, I don't think there's anything I necessarily regret, but I certainly have experienced the vulnerability hangover before. That's not to say that it's that I shouldn't have posted it. I think it's just acknowledging a human experience when we choose to share parts of ourselves that aren't the easiest to share, or it would be a lot easier just to continue on and kind of keep that to yourself rather than exposing yourself to your community and to the world.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also the comments, right? It's like people say, like, oh, don't read the comments. Well, you don't have that luxury when you're specifically rooted in the social media space. So, kind of finding that balance. And I mean, maybe speaking to boundaries, around that, when it comes to navigating negativity or maybe repeat discussion. You've shared something really vulnerable. It doesn't mean you want to talk about it every day for the next month. How do you kind of find that balance, or do you just say no at a certain point?
Do you say no to with the
Responding.
comments and how people, yeah, with
Do you turn off
responding?
comments? I
Oh,
mean, yeah.
yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. I find that anytime someone is just mean or rude, there's that block button.
Mm,
You don't owe anything to them to keep that comment there. Or if blocking feels like too much, just delete it. I have found that when I get heated and respond to someone, it never works out in my favor.
yeah.
As in, I will take the time to respond. So I'm taking time out of my day to acknowledge this person who shouldn't even be acknowledged. And then I'm waiting for them to respond. So now my mental energy is like, have they responded? Okay, they responded. It pisses me off more. Now I'm going to, like it's this
Totally.
vicious cycle that's not worth your time and energy. So just deleting the comment, I think, is a better service to yourself than having to spend all that time and energy trying to one up them. Two things that I want to share is that you will never please everyone.
Mm,
So here's a really specific example for you. I shared a reel about my miscarriage experience,
mm,
and I got 99.9% support. The most beautiful comments and messages and people sharing their personal experiences with me. And you would think that sharing something like that like how would someone be negative about that? However, I got one comment that I promptly deleted. I think I deleted it because I'm like, this is just not worth my time, and
Right.
it's in my mental headspace. And someone was essentially saying, what's up with people sharing? People say that no one talks about miscarriages. All I see is people talking and
Oh my
sharing about their
God.
miscarriages. You're doing this for attention and likes and all of that. And I was like,
Wow.
oh my
What a
gosh, like
terrible
this is,
person.
I know, out of like all the mean things to comment on, because I get random things all the time, but that
Sure.
was so personal, and definitely a little bit in that vulnerability hangover
Yeah.
uh, feeling that we were describing. So to get that kind of comment on that is really tough. But I promptly deleted that. However, on a more lighthearted note, one of my favorite things is getting comments that I can share with my community, and even better, if it can turn into some sort of an inside
I
joke.
have
And
seen this before. Please tell us about it.
I'll give you two examples that come to mind. And this is more so with comments that are like rude or mean, but like they really don't go that deep because they're
Yeah.
just from like a video goes super viral, and then you get all these comments of people who have no idea who you are writing a couple words. So one was a comment that said attention hog. However, hog was written HAWG. And I look at this, I'm like, that's kind of cool. Like, attention, howl.
It's very
And
Texas. Yeah.
I know. It's like a little bit of a southern drawl.
Yeah.
Attention, howl. I never thought about it that way. I like that. And so I put it on my stories just to give everyone a laugh. Because it's not so nice, but you can laugh at that.
Totally.
And someone messaged me and said, Jera, you gotta make merch with this. You gotta put it on a
Oh my
jacket.
God.
And
I love
so
that.
I went to some sort of customization site, and they had cool varsity-esque jackets. And I wasn't actually going to make these, but just for shits and giggles, I wrote attention hog in this kind of scripty font on the back, pasted it to my stories. And someone messaged me and they said, do you have like a PO box? Can I send you something? And a couple weeks later, this shirt arrives, and it is so cool. It's this big, I like big baggy shirts. And on the front, and then a bigger version on the back, is this kind of fuzzy, almost imagine like a nubby rug.
Amazing.
It's like this textured, and it says attention hog. Like it's a custom logo, and it's like tactile on this shirt. And I'm like, wow, this has really come full circle, having someone write attention hog, and now I have a shirt that says it. So that was one of my favorite,
I love that.
kind of mean comments coming to life as this big inside joke with my community.
Well, and I think that's the other thing too, is being able to laugh at it, because like you're right. If you spend that much time responding, I mean, there is, and because I worked in like the creative advertising agency space, I'm always thinking about cost of like my time and what is my hourly
Oh,
rate card,
yeah.
right? And if you spend 15 minutes even a day responding, that's a pretty expensive amount of time spent on
It's a
responding to
good
haters,
point.
and it's like you think about, how many thousands of dollars you're wasting of your energy, and it's like I'd much rather spend that on something I like. And so, I wish we had a merch drop link we could put in the show notes today for
I
that
know.
attention
I need to
hog.
actually consider it. Yeah. But with what you were just saying, a phrase came up into my mind, and I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something along the lines of like certain people are just committed to misunderstanding you,
Mm,
and no amount of time or energy or comments or DMs back to them is going to convince them otherwise. And so the
that's
more
right.
you can recognize that from the initial comment and not invest that time and energy to someone who's committed to misunderstanding you, the better we're all just going to be.
I think that that's really good guidance. And I think that a lot of people probably spend time in their fields, or even feeling, that they're inhibited by, seeing this, and they're worried about what happens if I put myself out there? Am I going to receive this? But when you realize how minuscule you can make it, or how laughable you can make a moment, I think it's actually hopefully going to give somebody who's listening to this some confidence of just like, put it out there, do the thing. Cause there's always going to be haters, but there's always going to be, for every, you said 99.9% of the comments, right, are positive and supportive. So that
Oh,
one
yeah.
person that's sitting in like their mom's basement, responding with like Cheeto dust on their fingers, fuck them. Fuck them.
Exactly. Exactly. It's really and I say this as someone who struggles with it. So I'm not on the other side. I'm not talking from my high and mighty
Mm,
place, but it is the cost of, it sounds so cheesy, of like working towards your dreams, of putting yourself out there, of working on your business. Because what's the alternative? You can stay in your comfort zone where you're not putting yourself out there and therefore not getting any negative, mean comments because you're staying within this cute, cozy safety box. But where is that getting you? You're not taking any steps forward. You're not supporting your business, your dreams, whatever that may be, versus putting yourself out there in support of whatever it is that you're working towards. And with that, unfortunately, you are going to get some people who don't agree with it or who say some not so nice things,
mm.
but that's the cost of putting yourself out there and working towards whatever it is you're wanting to do or be or become.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way that you put that too, Jera. I think that I'd be curious to know like what's one idea, and I'm sure there's many, but I'm sure like it would be good to hear one idea. What do you think majority of people, listeners, not even creators, get wrong about social media?
First thing that comes to mind is that it's fake. I think so many people brush social media off saying that it's fake, it's not real,
Mm,
it's contrived, it's a highlight reel. And I think, as with anything, there's a range. So, yeah, there are going to be people and accounts who are only putting the best of the best out there, or people who are always using filters and maybe other people look at them and then they feel bad about themselves because they don't look that way. So I'm
mm,
not denying that there are curated experiences and accounts and even potentially kind of fakeish stuff with the filters. Of course, that's out there. But to write social media off and just say that all of it is fake is so wildly inaccurate. Because for myself, what I've seen with other people, how social media has created community, how
mm.
it has connected people, how it supported businesses and changed people's lives entirely. I see the positive and the wonderful side and the very real side of it as well.
Yeah, and I think that like that's so important to think about when you're looking at like the evolution of it. I mean, I remember LiveJournal like way back in the day, Friendster, like all of it. But I mean,
Friendster,
the way we put ourselves
yeah.
out there, online has definitely evolved, to be more and more detail oriented. I think that if anything, it's gotten considerably less fake, and there is more praise put on authenticity and honesty. Recently, I saw. I mean, you shot a wedding, which was so cool. It
Yes.
seemed like so much fun. And I mean, talking about kind of social and content creation, do you see this being maybe more of a part of like event spaces, or, kind of growing in its scale of like, we're not just putting things onto a platform in a static fashion. I don't think there's anything static about the work that you share, but also like looking at it going into a wedding space. I'm like, I wish I thought of that for our wedding. That would have been amazing.
It's been amazing to see the rise of the wedding content creator over the last year, but I think even more so over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
It's something that popped up onto my TikTok feed several times, and I'm like, wow, what a great idea. I have a former student who has pivoted into wedding slash behind the scenes content creation in Australia and
Cool.
created a whole new business for herself. So it's been on my radar from what's popped up more so on TikTok on my FYP, as well as seeing my former student Ashley developing this business for herself. And I'm like, wow, this is really smart in a variety of ways for all parties. Because for a couple getting married, yes, you want the professional photos, and yes, you most likely want the professional video, but we also want the social media content as well. And we want it quick because most people have spent all this time and money preparing and,
Mm.
and investing and creating this beautiful experience, and they want to share it with their communities on Instagram or family that wasn't able to attend. And so the role of the wedding content creator is instant memories in a way, as well as ready to go social media content that a photographer isn't providing because they're creating the still images, and that a videographer is not providing because they're going to take probably at least a couple weeks to get that finished product to the couple, and it's not even optimized for social media. So it's a very kind of current thing that is evolving because of the social media landscape. And for me, I see a lot of opportunity in it because I would love to teach people how to do it. So
Yes.
I'm trying to get my hands dirty by doing a few weddings myself because I have the content creation skills, but having been at a few weddings now, there is nuance and there's different kind of things going on. Like, where do you place yourself when the photographer is there? And how do you make sure that the bride is getting all the content she asked for if she's still, stressed out and getting ready? So it's not just the content, it's also the relationships with everyone happening that day as well. So that's just a little insight into the general arena of wedding content creation that I think is evolving, and then what I'm seeing in that space and what I can potentially do with it to help other people maybe develop their wedding content creation businesses in the future.
I love that. I mean, on that note, what goals are you pursuing right now, Jera?
Right now, I am so excited. I'm working on my video editing course, and I cannot wait to get this out into the world because, one, I'm just excited about it, but two, there is such a need for the actual editing of content. I find that that is one of people's biggest pain points when it comes to executing ideas. They have an idea. Oh, I want to make a day in the life video, but then they don't know how to do it. Or they have glitches on Instagram and they don't quite know how to get around the glitches, and then their work is deleted and it all feels really hard. I have been editing since I was a child because that is what my mom does. She's in the film and video space.
Oh, incredible.
And yeah. And so for me, editing's like, oh, this is easy. I got this, but I want other people to feel that way as well. So the video editing course is all about the fundamental tools and techniques to create pretty much all the videos that you'll need to create, whether it's a tutorial, talking to camera, very simple transitions, because we are in the more beginner intermediate realm with this course. So I'm, making my way, getting close to getting that done, but that is the next thing that will be coming to life from the Jera brand.
I mean, that's amazing. We're definitely going to have to plug that in the show notes. So listeners, please go to the show notes and you'll be able to see the link to sign up for Jera's video editing course. It's amazing. I mean, we're coming up on time. This has been so incredible. Where can people go to learn more about you, Jera?
Yeah, you can find me on social media, Jera Bean, but there's a dot there. So Jera.bean on Instagram, Jera.bean on TikTok, and then just jerabean.com for my website.
I love that. And what is one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
One final thought. I always go with my gut with these kind of questions. Like, what bubbles up? What comes to my mind first? And I'm going to go with this idea of messy action. And I think that it applies if you're a beginner. It applies if you've been doing this for a while. But so often we think we need to post something that is perfect, something that is 100% done, or it looks beautiful, or has a perfect cover photo or the caption. And if we get stuck in this mindset, in this trap of feeling, needing, wanting everything to be perfect, one, we're going to show up way less consistently. And I think it's also going to stifle our creativity. Not everything needs to be a hit. Not everything needs to perform super well, but people do need to see you showing up, and they do want to hear your thoughts and your perspective and your view and your information. And in order to have that happen, that stuff doesn't need to be perfect. So messy action is all about taking that next step forward, even if something isn't perfect, even if something isn't totally ready yet, and just getting it out there and learning and improving as you go.
I mean, in the words of Jera, feel the fear and do it anyways.
There we go. Full circle moment.
Full circle moment. This has been another episode of Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez, and we'll talk to you next week. Don't Fuck This Up is a podcast written, produced, and edited by Lauren Alvarez. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. Be sure to follow, rate, and review this and every episode. And until next week, please keep it together and try your best not to fuck this up.